first touchstone that I'm going to start with is culture. Steve sort of said, culture eats strategy. And I think anyone who's heard Anne talk would have felt a deep resonance of our Catholicity at the core of transformation. But first, I thought I might invite Anne on the strength of external eyes and to connect with us. Is there something around culture that you've recognised, even that we have here, that connects with your idea of transformation in your environment?
First of all, I'd just like to thank you for the fantastic welcome that I received here. That's in our culture, the welcome that you gave. The other is the conviviality, the easy conversation that flows amongst you, the sharing of ideas, which is so important. Going to those 2 sessions where people shared ideas, that was just fantastic for me. I just loved hearing what people were doing. I've taken away a whole little folder of things with ideas, looking at the appraisal process, looking at those things to prevent Alzheimer's, which are given, looking at the work done on how to prevent lates in the morning. There was just so much that I gained from that, and it was such a privilege to be here, to be amongst you, and to be with a big group, because our secondary principals in Auckland are only about 8, so we don't actually get a big group like this to share ideas and amongst each other. We have a convention every 3 years where all the schools get together, where there is conviviality like this, but the size of your group really lends itself to sharing and gaining expertise from one another, and I think that's awesome. Thank you.
Steve, if I just flip to you, you talk about culture eats strategy, and then you talked about the power that comes in a community when the culture is unleashed around learning. Is there a takeaway that might give people courage? We've got a lot of schools where it ain't broke, so why fix it? But at the same time, there's a compulsion to be called to transformation rather than improvement. And that disconnect between, well, this is working, but now we've got to leap forward. Where does culture sit as a critical dynamic in taking that step into the beyond improvement?
Culture, to me, culture is the school. When you walk in, you see, you sense it. Sometimes it's very hard to describe. I was telling somebody, when I go into a school, one of the first places I go is into the restrooms, because I can see it tell a lot about the school culture just from the restrooms. If it's an old building, the restroom may be old, but if the trash is picked up, it's in the trash container, there's no writing on the wall, and it's kept up, it's got good culture. I can go in a new building, and there's trash everywhere, and you see writings on the wall. There's some culture that needs help. And I think culture really revolves around several things. Trust, and you've heard this before. Respect, personal responsibility, and then that perseverance to be able to move forward through all those things and to get to the next level. So to me, and when I've talked to, in the 2 reflections that we had, the sharings, I got that sense from all the tables that we were at in both sessions. So I see a lot of great culture, and I'm walking away and taking away that you have culture, you have a very strong culture, but sometimes it's how do you transform that and carry it forward to the classroom, to the school, that everybody's speaking that all-important same language. Because you can have great culture in one classroom, but not the other. So how do you transform that? And that's what I think the challenge is in a lot of schools.
Thank you. Greg Miller, you spoke of your learnings through a saying that came to you from one of your mentors, that you've got to stand for something or you might fall for anything or everything. As you join us in this journey charged with, you know, a greenfield site and the possibility of doing anything, what do you think would give you the courage to be able to ask the really hard questions about some aspects of our culture?
Well, I'll start by saying that I've been given permission to take risks. So we have to have a risk-taking culture. In moving forward, and the risk-taking culture supports the transition from improvement to transformation. But I don't think you can go straight to transformation without improvement. So in establishing a culture at St Luke's, and I think you've already picked up from me, I've got a lot more questions than answers, because I am the least knowledgeable about CEDP and the schools and how they work and their priorities. I'm on a steep learning curve around that, but I have a lot to learn. So the risk-taking culture requires many questions, and the question will be, what do we keep? What do we get rid of? And what do we add, which will value add and assist us to be a transformed next generation Catholic learning community? And if we keep asking ourselves around, and it's centred, from my perspective, we have a system emerging vision for St Luke's. I have to work and be the linchpin between system, which is not just an office at 12 Victoria Road, Parramatta, it's 78 other schools, and try and combine that with next practice and best practice. Now, what that looks like, I can't tell you. But I'm really excited to be on that journey of not only working with the staff, who will ultimately be the ones, the foundation staff will be charged with the responsibility of being risk takers but loyal and honourable to the vision of St Luke's as already articulated by the system. Our challenge is to, in a sense, operationalise that. And we won't do that just by working on our own. We'll only do that by having input, as I was saying at one of our sharing sessions. There are many good things happening in many schools. I've had the great fortune to see a number of those, and I'm looking forward to coming back to those people and back to those sites to help inform us about next practice.
So Greg, on that theme of finding commonality, what culture, common culture of risk-taking educators in the 21st century would you like to see as a commonality within our schools?
I wish I had the answer to that question. The issue is, there's a second part to the culture eats strategy quote, and it goes culture eats strategy and has structure for lunch. And the point is that, the traditional ways of planning are being challenged. That's the first part of what I want to say, but before I get to the question. The second thing is, the culture issue is really interesting. I'm not quite sure we understand what we say about culture. Most of the operational things that we do are around climate, and it's very different. The climate is the sort of things that you see in the schools, and oh yes, it feels good and it looks good. You have no understanding of what that culture in that school is, because culture is so deep and so embedded. So let's make sure we're not talking about climate, because climate can sort of just bubble along. And if you want an analogy, you can look outside and say it's a beautiful day, that's the climate. But there's an underlying thing going on out there called climate change. And we can, if we only focus on the climate, we're not going to look at the whole issues. The third comment I want to make about this is that, as I said yesterday, if we're going to look at culture, it's about trust. But with trust, you have to have honesty. Right? They're mutual, they're interrelated. You can't have trust without honesty, and you can't have honesty without trust. That's right at the core of it. Now, I know that our parents trust us generally. Some of them are not honest about even what's going on in the schools. You deal with that all the time. They take information from a range of sources and form their own opinions and all that sort of thing. We're not talking about that. I know there's concerns been about the changes that we've done in our system over the last several years. And I know people are questioning that, and that there might be a general trust, but is it real trust based on honesty? They're the issues I think that we've really got to get to when we're doing this sort of things. And I think it's one of the things Greg's going to be able to, in the new school, really address at the beginning. If the hallmarks are total honesty and trust, I think we'll be doing something very well. And it's not a problem, this issue that people don't automatically trust you. That's just the nature of people. The issue is that you're honest and you can deal with it. I think that's where we sometimes fall down. It's in the dealing with it. You might not like a particular way of learning. Well, you have a responsibility to stand up and justify that. You don't have to remain silent. That's how we learn. So I'm not putting it out there as a negative. I'm saying it's actually a positive. But if we know we can be honest about it and trust that things will move and change from it, then it becomes a healthy approach. And I think that's the issue around the approach. Let's stop doing it at the climate level. Let's talk about those fundamentals, and I think we'll get a better outcome.
I'm really curious about the panel's view on this, and I certainly haven't got the answer. But I'm curious, and we're curious, about how much does the transformation or continuing transformation in a school depend on the transformation of the people within the school? And is there a responsibility for that? And if there is a connection, how do we assist each other to manage the pain and the fear and the joys that perhaps go with that? Does that make sense? And is that the right question to ask?
I would like to say that it all depends on ownership, and it all depends if it comes from the bottom up. As a leader, we have to be prepared to listen, and we have to be open to change. As working in a Catholic school, we have such an enormous advantage. We have the advantage of our faith. We have the advantage of the fact that we know that Christ is present in every single person that we come into contact with. Now, if you acknowledge that, then there's a trust, then there's an honesty, then there's a professional love that is evident within the school. And yes, a leader is important, but the hallmark of a good leader is that when they've gone 5 years later, that journey is still continuing. That's the hallmark of a successful leader. And if it's come from the bottom, and if any leader is prepared to listen, then change will move forward. That's because they have confidence and belief in themselves, and that's what's important. Every single person is valued by God, and we need to reflect that appreciation of the value of every single individual. Our students are valued, our staff are valued, and if we value people, then that means that they feel safe to make suggestions, they feel safe to make mistakes. I think that's really important. And it's safe for us to make mistakes because we never get it right all the time. We all make mistakes. And in professional learning groups where they can sit and talk to each other about mistakes they've made or what works or what succeeds and reaffirm each other, then there's progress forward. But as a Catholic school, we are indeed privileged, and we're I feel really humble that we're part of a system like that and that we've been gifted with our schools.
I think that's one of the best questions I've heard for a long time, Bernie, because it goes right to the very heart of what we're doing. I don't think we're being Catholic unless we actually answer that question, because that's right at the heart of it. You know, the improvement model is a way of sort of, you know, doing it for some, you know, and gradually, hopefully, we'll get there. The good news is the kingdom's now. It's for everyone. And it means we need to change. I mean, we are called to be countercultural. We're called to be different. And that will require a change in attitude and mind. And we know the model. We've got the model. We know the stories. So if we don't do that, we're not actually answering our responsibility on behalf of the evangelising mission of the church. I agree wholeheartedly with Anne and talk about how those things need to take place. But unless there's a transformation of self, and then, you know, whatever profession, whatever vocation you choose, if you want to be authentically Catholic, it's to grow and change and find new ways to do it. And in that sense, we know Jesus didn't come and just, you know, here's the book and there's the university you can go to, and once you do all that, you'll be right. Follow me, and we will together, it's exactly Anne's point, you know, we will together learn how to do this. So it's right at the very heart of it.
I notice, hearing these words, I think of Romans 12:2 as be not conformed to this world, but rather be transformed by renewal of the mind, that by testing you'll discern the will of God, what is good and true and perfect. And I think there's a wonderful source of literature that deeply connects us between these things. I still love seeing it embodied.
I was about to say that.
No worries.
Well, Romans came to mind straight away.
And on that, those sharp... That'd be great. We've got a question. There is a Latin influence rather than the Greek.
I'd just like to throw a question to anyone on the panel. I'm interested in Elmore's idea of the unexamined wallpaper of education. All those things that happen that they just happen and we just get used to them and we just move on. And I'm particularly interested in the fact that part of our unexamined wallpaper, I think, right across the Western world is that we teach kids how to read, but by the time they get to year 3, a whole lot of them don't read. And a lot of them still can't read by the time they're 15. And we spend so much energy addressing that problem. I'd love us to take on a project where we worked out what it would take to get every student to read by year 3, work out how much it costs, and do it everywhere. Because I think that's a fundamental problem that we all face. And I think kids not being able to read is something that we've lost, not that we've lost sight of it, but for some way it's become acceptable for us for some kids not to read. And I'm not being critical of anyone who's here, I'm just saying it's a systemic problem. We just know 10, 20, 30, I don't know whatever percentage. So I'd be really interested to hear what the panel had to say about what would be possible there, particularly when we know so many people who can't read wind up in jail, right up in criminal problems, drug, alcoholism. That's really clear, and I just think we've got a real social imperative to do something more.
And I just would probably then frame that in terms of the next touchstone, which is about redesign, and looking at the learning that came through in all the pieces here, that here's an opportunity driven by moral imperative and very concrete targets, and we hear the language of a principle mindful of very precise achievements can be measured. But if I broaden it to, keeping in context the question that came from Kevin, that concept of the power of the redesign of the learning that can respond to something as passionately articulated as Kevin made. Where does the power lie in the redesign of the learning? You know, we don't have to reinvent this, do we? There's stuff we can draw on.
No, we don't have. Look, we don't have to reinvent things. I mean, as part of my very steep learning curve in the last 4 months, and speaking with primary specialists around the precision required to enable a child to read or support a child in that reading journey, it's crucial. And at St Luke's, I suppose, in the few times I've had a chance to talk with Francis, that will be our priority, because it's through, in two senses, in that those those early years, children coming to know Christ with the way that they interact in a Catholic community, and also unlocking the key to potential rests with the ability to read and then write. Now, as a person who's been involved in secondary education for 28 years, I really don't know how that works. But I damn well better find out pretty quickly and surround myself with people who are expert at that, because we've already started talking about models that can be agile and responsive and adaptive enough at the point of need for children across 3 or 4 years. Because when they turn up to kindergarten, there's already, as I understand it, 18 months of difference in some of those key areas. Now, and that grows, that stretches, it doesn't get any, you know, we're talking about flipping that on its head and reducing that, so at some point in time around year 3, we have the confidence to say, well, they're at an accomplished level of reading and writing that enables them and unlocks the key to then emerge themselves in other ways of extending and enriching themselves. But I have a lot to learn in that space. Personally, I have a lot to learn in that space. Sorry? The whole world does, I think. Yeah, well, I'm at the end of the queue. Steve, you want to add anything?
Well, you've heard my story for the last 2 days. I don't know your story, but what I'm hearing is that you have a reading problem. If you have a reading problem, and this didn't happen overnight, it's been perpetuated over the years. My question will be back put to you. What innovative strategies or innovative instructional design have you brought in to change those same practices instead of perpetuating what's been happening? How do you get students excited about reading? How do you reach to that? Besides opening a book, and we're going to go through the mechanics of reading, how do you get somebody excited about that? If you've heard my story at all in the last 2 days, one thing I hope you take away from that is that it's about engaging students and getting them excited. There's a roundabout way to do that. You can get them excited through other ways and get them engaged. And so I would say open your mind, look at the innovative or the new, let's say innovative ways of redesigning instruction in order to capture the students' interest, engage them, to still accomplish the reading through a portion, chunks, within the larger scope of possibly a project that has multiple facets involved with the reading. I just saw a video, and it was just amazing. In my understanding, where is it from? Burke? I don't know where that is, but my understanding from what it's a pretty rural area. And the students there could be low achieving. I don't know, but I just saw a video. I guarantee those students went to school. They learned how to read. They learned how to collaborate. They learned how to research. Because this video, I'm taking it back to my school, and I'm going to show my students, and they're going to come up with a video, and we're going to communicate back and forth somehow. It was pretty amazing. But again, it wasn't about bringing them in and say, today we're going to do this and this and this. We've got to find a hook. You've got to find a way to get them excited. So my 2 cents with that. All right?
I disagree with you, Kevin, that we don't know. We actually do know, and we've known for a long time. We just refuse to understand the implications. The first thing I'd say about it, the biggest problem is that it's not a teacher problem, it's all our problem. We all have to own the problem, and thank you for asking that question. It's our problem, it's not the teacher's problem. We know in our schools, and we know some of our teachers, have textbooks that are 30 years old. Digger and whatever those all ones are, you know the ones I'm talking about, are still using SRA reading kits, a whole range of they're there. They're there. Has every school ever done an audit of their texts? What do you engage in multiliteracies understanding? And we've worked very hard in our system to have a focus on literacy, numeracy and formation, as you know. And it's based on what we believe we know about good theory, practice and evidence. But I think the issue comes down to everyone taking that responsibility, right from our principals through to our teachers and the system, because that's the only way we're going to be able to do it. We'll have to do that together.
My response to that is that it's really nice to hear that it's the same here as in New Zealand. But it really goes further back, because by the time they reach school, there's a certain level at which they should be, but they're not. And so really it has to go back to the parents. And we as teachers are taking on more and more and more, and more and more and more is expected of us. What are the parents doing? Are they reading to their children? Are they ingraining a love of literature? And when you look at how much television is used as a babysitter, and how easy it is just to have visual images floating in front of you, or games, what joy is there in reading when you've got all that competition in front of you? So it needs to go back to parents, to get parents reading. How many of our children actually see their parents reading as an example? And how many of our parents are still reading to their children at home before school, before they actually reach school, and have built within them a love of literature? So one of the things which we trialled was we got a whole supply donated to us of nice books, and we sent the kids home with these books at the end of the year to read. And if they didn't come back, we weren't bothered, because we knew we'd left books in the home. And we did that for a couple of years. And what we did find interesting was that if we got books that actually related to the parents' interest, the parents actually read those books as well. So if we had books, for instance, on some books on Samoan history written simply, went home, they didn't come back, because the parents were reading those books, and so you had an example. It's to raise the levels of literacy and numeracy is an enormous challenge. And we raise ours from between the ages of 13 and 15. So they move in the 2 years. But that's by absolutely giving them an explosion of literature to read. And that costs money. And I'm sorry, even though I'm pretty ancient, I don't know of the boxes that you're talking about. But
the question now I'm going to put to the panel is, how important is really contextualising this transformational journey to your community, to your knowledge of your school and your people, and how might that give us more courage to know we can make a difference sooner rather than later in our contexts?
I don't think we have a choice in relation to redesigning learning, because what's coming is a transformation of our world which will result in all sorts of things that we know. Driverless cars, you know, the biggest accommodation group in the world is Airbnb. They don't own 1 cent of property. So what does that world look like in 15 years' time for the students who are in calcs at the moment? So I don't think we have a choice about redesign, and it probably gets back a little bit to what Greg was saying before. There needs to be a trust and an honesty agenda, because for me, trust and honesty equals authenticity. And from that, I think that's the starting point in educating our parents as the third partner of that three-way partnership between students, staff and parents. And you're right, Anne, we shouldn't be owning everything, and we keep getting dumped with problems. But I think in the education, well, problems and challenges, I don't see students as problems, but we're supposed to solve the society ills of what's been manifesting what's been unfolding over the last 15, 20, 25 years. And that's not just Catholic schools, that's all schools. So I suppose my point is that we need to educate parents and embrace parents. I think if we're being really honest, if we were to ask ourselves, would we welcome parents to walk into our classrooms all day, every day, or any part of the day? I think I would take a step back at that, because I'd be worried about the lowest common denominator parent who would maybe try and come in and take over the class and tell the teacher that little Johnny or little Mary's mucking around, when we could have far more contribution from parents about how classrooms and learning could look like in a reimagined educational setting that prepares their children, our students, their children, for the world that awaits. And it's not just await, it's here now. And how we redesign that, I think, requires bold questions. Like, for example, in relation to the reading question that Kevin raised, you know, are we prepared at Year 7 or are we prepared at Year 6 as a traditional exit point? Are we bold enough and brave enough to say, look, your child still can't read. We need to put in methods that we know that work and have worked for a lot of our students in Years 2, 3 and 4. Are we prepared to be brave enough and bold enough to say, we've got to take a different approach than just saying, you finish primary school, into secondary school you go? Because if we do that, we're actually saying we're going to set this child up for failure. Now, I know that's confronting, and I've accepted people in the secondary schools of the past who couldn't read. Look, we'll do our best, knowing that our best isn't good enough for that child to be able to read. So that does, are we in a preschool to post-school setting at St Luke's prepared to have 15, 16, 17-year-old really capable, intelligent students who are prepared to give of their service? Are we prepared to have them trained as reading recovery teachers? Are we prepared to ask why that question is not good enough? Can they work with teachers to learn and understand and help facilitate those teachers who are the trained specialists with that? I don't know.
Parents send us their best. We don't get to pick and choose. They send us their best. We have to take what they send us and we have to move those students. Parents don't know what they don't know. Students, we as teachers don't know what we don't know. We have to educate our parents, educate our community. We talk about a changed society. We need to educate them why we're changing, maybe why we're redesigning. They don't know. I heard conversations that parents are coming and pulling their students out because they weren't teaching the same way when they went to school. Teaching's the only profession I know where parents will tell you how to teach because they know it all, because they've been through it. They wouldn't go tell a doctor what to do, but they will in education because, look, I turned out okay. But yet, society's changing. We're preparing students for careers that we don't even know exist. And we need to educate our parents in our community, bring them in, and explain and show them, so they can see and they're part of that transformation. You have to have buy-in. You have to have buy-in from the community, from your parents, from your students. But make no mistake, they're sending you their best, and they're not looking for excuses. We can say it's all this person's fault or this person's. It doesn't matter. We're all in this together. And we want parents to be partners with us. We don't want them to be adversaries. I want them in my school. I want them in the class. Not saying I wouldn't agree with you, but I want them in because I want them to be part of it. By the time they get to secondary, most parents don't want to come to the secondary campus because A, they either were poor students themselves and had bad experiences. B, the only reason they're up there is because you're calling up because there was a problem. Wouldn't it be amazing if they came up because you wanted them to come up and be part of the school? Start working with your community and your parents to explain why we're moving these things, why you're moving, looking at redesigning, why you're looking at changing, because you're preparing students. They're sending you their best. You want to give them your best to help move their children. So I would kind of go from that approach.
Seth Godin wrote The Icarus Deception within the last decade. Its thesis, other than the fact we tell ourselves myths that limit our aspirations, hence the title, but the central thesis was, in this day and age, what traditionally has been a comfort zone for people was often a safety zone. So if we got comfortable, it was usually somewhere safe. The thesis of that book is that now, in this transformed world post-iPhone 2007, the comfort zone is no longer safe. And yet, if you try and move people out of their comfort zone, that's extraordinarily difficult. But now we have a moral imperative. It isn't safe to dwell there. In the light of that, what's your action from here? However strong your school is, however far down the pathway you are, however high the trust is, however capable your staff, what's your action that is the next stage of transformation?